morning. I am continuing in my series on the life and ministry of Jesus. And we're going to look at his interaction with some Gentiles today, as Tom mentioned. So I'm going to be not going in chronological order as far as Jesus' ministry is concerned, because I want to put these interactions together. I think it's important that we see them together. We might miss some things if we just go straight through his ministry, because he's interacting with these folks at different points in time in his ministry. We'll be starting in Matthew chapter 8, if you want to flip over there. For anyone who may not know what a Gentile is, it's simply a blanket term for anyone who is not ethnically speaking a Jew. Some Gentiles did come to believe in the God of the Jews. They were called God-fearers in the New Testament. Some of them would have been more converted than others, in that some of the males didn't get circumcised in their conversion for a good reason. Let's go ahead and take a look at our first story here, Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 to 13. When Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him and pleaded with him, and saying, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented." And Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion said, "Lord, I'm not good enough for you to come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to this man, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it." Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who were following, "Truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, it shall be done for you as you have believed." And the servant was healed that very moment. Now, a centurion is a military leader of about 100 soldiers or so. Our word century, which means 100 years, also comes from that same root. So if you have trouble remembering what a centurion is, just think of century and that'll help out. Now, his faith was indeed great. He says he's not worthy for Jesus to come under his roof. It kind of sounds to me like when John the Baptizer said he's unworthy to untie Jesus' sandal. But the fact is, this guy says, "No, just do the command and I know it will be done," just like I command somebody to go and do something. I can't really think of anyone who did a long-distance miracle before Jesus did. The only thing that kind of comes close that I thought of was when Elisha told Naaman to go dip himself in the Jordan 7 times, because Naaman had to go quite a ways to do that. But it's not quite the same thing, right? It's not Elisha healing somebody who's from the country Naaman came from. Naaman came to him. So to have the faith to believe that he could just say the word without even seeing the servant and he would be healed is quite a feat. Luke records this in chapter 7 of his gospel also. He gives us a few different details. He has the Jewish leaders coming to Jesus on behalf of the centurion, because the centurion, they said, loved their nation, and he's the one who funded the building of their synagogue. The centurion then sends people to intercept Jesus and say, "No, don't come here, I'm not worthy," and says the same thing he says in Matthew. Either way here, we have Jesus seeing the faith of this guy, and to say that he hasn't seen this level of faith from anyone in Israel had to sting a little bit, right? Because he has Israelites around him, his disciples in one case, and the Jewish elders in another case. And so this had to make the people think, okay, if this Gentile has such great faith, why don't we Israelites? Because we have a more full revelation of this than he does. Our next story is in John chapter 4, and some people see similarities in these stories, and there are some similarities, but some go a little too far in saying the same incident, just in different circumstances, and I think you'll see why as we start to read. John chapter 4, verses 46 to 54, which is just after the Samaritan woman at the well I talked about last week. Then he, Jesus, came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And there was a royal official whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and was asking him to come down and heal his son, for he was about to die. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will never believe." The royal official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son lives." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started on his way. And while he was still going down, his slaves met him, saying that his son was alive. So he inquired of them the hour when he began to get better. Then they said to him, "Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him." So the father knew that it was at that hour in which Jesus said to him, "Your son lives." And he himself believed in his whole household. This is again a second sign that Jesus did when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. So again, we have someone coming to Jesus saying, "Please heal someone for me," and they're both in Capernaum. The person that he's healing is, anyway. And Jesus does a long-distance miracle again, so you can see why people would think it's the same incident. But what we have are a Roman centurion in Matthew, a royal official in John, and this official, he worked for Herod. And to be honest, he may not be a Gentile, he may have been a Jew. We can't really know for sure. But they're still the different guys. And one is a servant who is paralyzed, the other is a son who is sick and dying. I think you get the point that these two stories are two different incidences where Jesus did a very similar thing. This father still shows a great amount of faith, though. Whether he's a Jew or a Gentile doesn't matter at this point. Because Cana and Capernaum, they're about a day's walk apart, several hours. And he's going to Jesus, believing he can heal him. He's hoping to get him back in time before his son dies. So his faith maybe isn't as strong as the centurion's was, or the centurion knew he could just give the word. And Jesus sort of berates him a little bit, that unless you see a sign, you're not going to believe. So he has faith, but not a whole lot. However, when Jesus says, "Your son lives, go home," he does that. I imagine he's a little downtrodden. He would really like Jesus to come and see his son, but he still believes and he goes home. And it's the next day, and the servants say, "Your son's alive." What time was it? About the 7th hour, which is about 1 p.m. And that sign is what finally clicks it for him, and he believes, and he tells his household, and they believe. Seems to me the centurion and his family believed already. Let's go ahead and look at the next one in Luke chapter 8. Now this one, it seems to me that Jesus is going out of his way to meet this guy. And you'll see why here in a second. Luke chapter 8, verses 26 to 39. Then they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he came out onto the land, a man from the city met him, one who was possessed with demons, and had not put on any garment for a long time, and was not living in a house, but in the tombs. Now seeing Jesus, he cried out and fell before him, and said in a loud voice, "What do I have to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for it had seized him many times, and he was bound with chains and shackles, being kept under guard. And yet, breaking his bonds, he was driven by the demon into the desolate regions. And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. And they were pleading with him not to command them to go away into the abyss. Now there was a herd of many swine feeding there on the mountain, and the demons pleaded with him to permit them to enter the swine. And he gave them permission. And when the demons came out of the man, they entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. And when the herdsmen saw what had happened, they ran away and reported it in the city and in the countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man for whom the demons had gone out, sitting down at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it reported to them how the man who was demon-possessed had been saved. And all the people of the country of the Gerasenes and the surrounding district asked him to leave them, for they were gripped with great fear. And he got into a boat and returned. But the man from whom the demons had gone out was begging him that he might accompany him. But he sent him away, saying, "Return to your house and recount what great things God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. Now, Matthew and Mark also record this for us. Matthew gives us a few different details. There were 2 demoniacs, not just one. But that's not an issue because Luke and Mark don't say there was only one. They just focus on the one. Matthew mentions the Gadarenes instead of the Gerasenes. There were two different cities this area was known by, and Matthew, writing to the locals, would have used the city they were familiar with, whereas Luke and Mark, writing to non-locals, would have used the city that they were familiar with to indicate the area that he's in. So these aren't really issues that need to be worried about. The demons possessing this man or these men made them really strong. Obviously, they were bound with chains and shackles. Right? These are iron. The World's Strongest Man contest may have a contest where they break chains, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure this guy by himself couldn't have done it. The demons had to make him that strong. The demon says his name is Legion. Well, a Roman legion is about 5,000 or 6,000 soldiers. Now, I don't know if there are 5,000 to 6,000 demons in this guy, or between the two guys, but there were definitely enough to drive a whole herd of pigs crazy. Of course, how many pigs are in the herd, I don't know. Still a lot of demons. When people come out, they're afraid. Why are they afraid? Well, this individual or the individuals were strong, right? They were afraid of these guys, and yet they're sitting here at Jesus' feet. So Jesus kind of tamed the guy, so to speak. Well, if you're afraid of this guy, you're going to be afraid of whoever you're taming, right? Right. It makes a lot of sense there. But also, Jesus had destroyed some of their livelihood, right? The pigs were a herd for sale. These were Gentiles, they can eat pigs. And I imagine they were wondering, well, if he did that to heal this guy, what else is he going to destroy in healing other people in the area? And so they asked him to leave. I want to point out, Jesus seems to have purposely went to this area, an area that's mostly Gentile. And not only that, but they're at least near a graveyard. Right? The man was living in the tombs, and he comes out to see Jesus. Touching a dead body makes you unclean according to the Mosaic law. And there's a herd of pigs over here. Pigs are unclean according to the Mosaic law. Jesus is purposely going into an area where he has a high likelihood of becoming unclean. If he weren't Jesus anyway. I don't think Jesus can actually become unclean, but that's another story. It saddens me that the Jews weren't going out to these places, and I imagine it's because they didn't want to risk becoming unclean. But the Mosaic law provides ways to become clean again. Jesus knew that, and like I said, I don't think he could become unclean, but he still would have gone back and done those things just to make sure, because he's a good Jew and he's following the law of Moses. If he had become unclean, he would have known whether he did or didn't. But in doing this, in going to an unclean place, he shows his care for these Gentiles, even though they're not of the house of Israel. He goes out of his way to find and heal them. And then he sends these guys off and says, go tell people what God did for you. He's starting his mission to the Gentiles before he even meets the Apostle Paul, right, on the road to Damascus, and knocking him off his high horse. Literally, maybe. Unless he was riding a donkey. The last one I want to take a look at is in Matthew 15. And this is an interaction that does tend to get a lot of flack from people, even from people who claim to believe. So Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 to 28. And going away from there, that is Gennesaret, Jesus withdrew into the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry out, saying, have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed. But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and were pleading with him, saying, send her away, because she keeps shouting at us. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and was bowing down before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered and said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. But she said, yes, Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was healed at once. Yet another long-distance healing. Jesus was quite a ways outside of the Jewish territory at this point in time, and there were Jews throughout the Roman Empire that he could have been going to, but I think the fact that he's out that far and she realizes that it makes sense for her to try and take advantage of this. But I wonder, how did she know about Jesus? How did she know that he could heal her daughter? This is a little bit later in his ministry, so maybe word was getting around. But more than that, how did she know to call him the son of David? That's a messianic title. And a dangerous title because David is king, and if he's a son of David, then he has a right to the throne, which he did. But how did she know? I can't give you that answer. I have no clue how she knew. All I can say is word must have gotten around about him. If you notice, it's not until after his disciples say something that he finally addresses the woman. That's one reason why he gets flack. He was ignoring her. But he's doing it for a reason. He wants his disciples to see something, and he's pushing her faith. Kind of like God tested Abraham's faith. He's testing her faith in the same way. In a similar way, I should say. Instead of sending her away like his disciples ask, he has a conversation with her. Right? And it might seem a little harsh because he's saying, well, I'm not sent to you, I'm sent to the Israelites. But she persists. You can help me. Please help me. And another reason he gets some flack is he seems to be calling her a dog. Right? You don't take the bread from the children, a.k.a. Israel, and give it to the dogs, a.k.a. the Gentiles. You don't do that. I want to point out the Greek word that he uses and she uses for dog is the diminutive form, meaning it's a small dog or puppy, right? Not a big dog. It's also important to note that according to the Mosaic law, dogs were unclean, and the Jews wouldn't have had them in their houses as pets. They would have been out on the streets. So Jesus seems to be saying it's not right to take bread from the table of the children and throw it outside to the stray dogs. But what she says is, yes, but even the dogs get the crumbs from their master's table. If she is a Gentile, they do have dogs as pets. And that's what she's hearing while he's talking to her. I imagine the disciples were kind of snickering, thinking he's insulting her, when really he's not. Because he would have known how she would have understood. And it's this great faith of hers. It shows that she believes he has enough power and authority to not only do what he's sent to do, that is to the house of Israel, and of course the crucifixion, which she didn't know about, but being sent to the house of Israel, he has enough left over in his crumbs of power, if you will, to heal her daughter, to help her out. And it's that great faith that Jesus uses to heal her daughter and to show his disciples the compassion and mercy that God has even on the Gentiles, who are to be included in the kingdom. And along those lines, I want to go ahead and take a look at some passages in Isaiah to show that even in the Old Testament, the Gentiles were to be included and are promised to be included. Because these are prophecies about the future from Isaiah's point. So Isaiah chapter 2 is where we're going to start off. We'll look at verses 2 to 5. Now it will be that in the last days, the mountain of the house of Yahweh will be established as the head of the mountains, and will be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. And many peoples will come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may instruct us from his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion the law will go forth, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem, and he will judge between the nations, and will render decisions for many peoples. And they will hammer their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. Come, house of Jacob, and let us walk in the light of Yahweh. So the nations, that's another way of saying the Gentiles. Right? It's not just the nation of Israel, it's the nations. It's all of them. And so this is an indication that they are to be included in the kingdom. The next one I want to take a look at is Isaiah 56, verses 3 to 8. And if you were in our Sunday morning Bible study, which if you weren't, I would encourage you to try and make it if you can, we have Philip talking to an Ethiopian eunuch. And the Ethiopian was reading Isaiah 53. And I imagine that as Philip continues to teach him, he eventually comes to this passage. So I think that would be very good for the Ethiopian eunuch to hear. So chapter 56, verses 3 to 8. Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh say, Yahweh will separate me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, Behold, I am a dry tree. For thus says Yahweh, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths and choose what pleases me and hold fast my covenant, to them I will give in my house and within my walls a memorial, and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name which will not be cut off. Also the foreigners who join themselves to Yahweh, to minister to him, to love the name of Yahweh, to be his slaves, everyone who keeps from profaning the Sabbath and takes hold of my covenant, even those I will bring to my holy mountain and make them glad in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be acceptable on my altar. For my house will be called a house of prayer for all the peoples. Lord Yahweh, who gathers the banished of Israel, declares, yet others I will gather to them, to those already gathered. The Ethiopian eunuch was both a foreigner and a eunuch. Eunuchs were considered unclean, unworthy to be servants in the temple of God, the physical temple. But here Yahweh is saying, you're still included, and even though you can't have children, I'm going to give you something better. And the foreigner, you have a name that's going to be in my house. If you happen to go to the Wednesday night Bible studies, we were in Revelation, and he talked about the pillars and how the name of these folks is going to be those who endure to the end will be written on the pillars of the house of God. So we have a similar statement going on here. And when Jesus mentioned that he has sheep of another flock, that kind of sounds like this here. Others I will gather to those already gathered. So we can see Gentile inclusion in this. The last one I want to look at is in Isaiah chapter 60, verses 3 to 5. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes around about, and see, they all gather together. They come to you. Your sons will come from afar, and your daughters will be carried on the nurse's hip. Then you will see and be radiant, and your heart will tremble and be large with joy, because the abundance of the sea will be turned to you. The wealth of the nations will come to you. We have here the nations again going to God's light. As we saw in a few of the other parts of my series, Jesus is the light of God. And we have here Gentiles coming to Jesus for healing, for learning. And so we have this coming through. And the part about coming up to the house of Abraham sounds a little bit like what Jesus said about people coming from east and west and dining at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And something else that I wanted to point out, in that first story, he says that people will be brought in, but the sons of the kingdom will be cast out to outer darkness. Now, this is not anti-Semitic. Jesus is a Semite. He is a Jew, so it's not anti-Jewish. But he's saying that it's not being born within any specific group that saves you. Unlike Israel thought. They thought that being descendants of Abraham, they were special and they were saved. It didn't really matter that much. But Jesus is saying it's not really the case. For us today, I want to encourage those of us who have children or are having children that we need to teach them what we believe and why. We need to prepare them for the various things the world's going to throw at them, including saying that this is wrong for whatever reason. Because just because they're your children and you're saved doesn't mean they're saved. They need to make that decision for themselves when they come of age. So we need to be careful and teach them. I'm very thankful that Jesus went to the Gentiles. I'm very thankful that this is open to us because, as far as I know, I'm not Jewish at all, ethnically. And yet here I am preaching his word and saved. I'm very thankful for that. And I assume the same thing is said of all of you. I don't know if anyone is Jewish or not, but if you are, then you're still saved too, for the same reasons I am. And not just because you're Jewish. With that, let's go ahead and pray and sing our last song. Lord, thank you for showing us that even at a time before the cross, you were concerned about those who were not of Israelite descent. Even in the Old Testament, your heart was still for them, and they could come to you and follow you. Lord, I pray that you will help us to see others in a similar light, that even though they're not followers yet, you still love them, and we should love them too, in the hopes that through all that, they will come to know you and become a follower. And I pray, Lord, that you will be with us today as we go out, have some fun at the ball game, and then listen to some worship music at the concert. And if there's someone there that you want us to talk to, please help us to see that and point us in the right direction. It's in your name, Lord Jesus, I pray.